Recent developments indicate a dramatic escalation of the conflict in western Ukraine, as President Zelensky has reportedly secured commitments from Poland and Romania to deploy their air forces into the war-torn skies. This unprecedented move, framed by Zelensky as a necessary defense against a potential future Russian invasion of their own territories, mark a critical turning point, bringing NATO-aligned aircraft into direct confrontation with Russian jets for the first time in history within the Ukrainian conflict zone. The decision by Poland and Romania to engage actively in aerial combat operations against Russian forces is being widely interpreted as an unprovoked act by Russia, which has consistently warned against any direct military intervention by NATO member states. This development has triggered a swift and unequivocal response from Moscow, with President Putin declaring that Russia is now in a state of war with NATO, emphasizing that even a single engagement resulting in a Russian jet being struck by Romanian or Polish aircraft would be considered an act of war against the entire NATO alliance. These implications of these significant escalations are profound, raising serious concerns about the potential for wider regional or even global conflicts. The direct involvement of NATO air power, even from individual member states, fundamentally alter the dynamic of the conflict, shifting it from a proxy war to a direct confrontation between Russia and elements of the Western military alliance. The immediate future of diplomatic efforts and de-escalation initiatives appear increasingly bleak in light of these declarations and military commitments. The rationale behind Zelensky's successful persuasion of Warsaw and Bucharest reportedly centered on the grave concerns that a Russian victory in Ukraine would inevitably lead to further Russian expansionism into neighboring countries, particularly those with shared borders and historical ties to both Russia and the former Soviet bloc. This argument, while consistently articulated by Ukrainian leadership since the initial invasion, appears to have resonated with Polish and Romanian authorities to a degree that has now translated into active military participation. The commitment of both Army and Air Force assets from Poland and Romania signifies a comprehensive shift in their involvement, moving beyond humanitarian aid, sanctions, and defensive military assistance to direct offensive operation within Ukraine. This strategic recalibration by Poland and Romania underscores growing apprehension among Eastern European NATO members regarding Russia's long-term intention and a perceived inadequacy of existing deterrence measures. The decision to commit to such a direct and high-stakes intervention reflects a calculation that inaction now will lead to greater threats in the future, despite the clear and present danger of direct conflict with Russia. The deployment of advanced fighter jets and ground forces from these nations into a theater of active combat against a nuclear-armed adversary represents a monumental gamble, the outcome of which remains highly uncertain and fraught with peril. The very act of engaging Russian aircraft in dogfights over Ukrainian territory shatters previous red lines and establishes a new precedent for international military involvement in the conflict. The immediate operational consequences of these aerial engagements are expected to be substantial, with the introduction of Polish and Romanian fighter jets potentially altering the balance of air superiority in western Ukraine. Russian air defense and air force assets will now face a multinational coalition, increasing the complexity and intensity of aerial combat. However, the political and geopolitical ramifications far outweigh the tactical advantages. President Putin's explicit declaration of war against NATO, triggered by the involvement of even two member states' air forces, signifies a dramatic escalation in rhetoric and a potential shift in military doctrine. The Russian response is anticipated to be severe and multifaceted, potentially involving intensified attacks on Ukrainian targets, expanded cyber warfare operations, and increased military posturing along the borders with NATO countries. The challenge for the broader NATO alliance will be to manage this new reality, balancing the principle of collective defense under Article 5 with the imperative of avoiding an all-out war with Russia. The direct engagement of Polish and Romanian aircraft, even if not formally sanctioned as a NATO operation, effectively places these nations on a direct war footing with Russia, with the potential for consequences that could rapidly spill over into other NATO territories. The international community watched with bated breath as the conflict enters this perilous new phase, with the specter of a wider European conflict looming larger than ever before. The historical significance of NATO aircraft engaging Russian jets in direct combat cannot be overstated. This moment marks a profound departure from decades of Cold War-era proxy conflicts and carefully managed geopolitical tensions. While individual NATO members have provided extensive military aid and training to Ukraine, direct combat operations involving NATO air forces against Russia were previously considered an unthinkable red line, primarily due to the inherent risk of triggering a full-scale war. The fact that this line has now been crossed, driven by the perceived existential threats to Poland and Romania, underscores the extreme pressure and fears that have gripped Eastern Europe since the initial invasion of Ukraine. The immediate aftermath of these aerial engagements will be closely scrutinized for any signs of a proportional or disproportional Russian response, as well as for any indications of broader NATO involvement. The rhetoric from Moscow leaves little room for ambiguity. Russia views this as a direct challenge from the entire alliance, irrespective of individual nations' sovereign decisions. The path forward is fraught with danger, and the coming days and weeks will be critical in determining whether this escalation can be contained or if it will inevitably spiral into a far more devastating and widespread conflict across the European continent. The world now faces a renewed and intensified period of global instability, directly attributable to the choice made in Kyiv, Warsaw, and Bucharest. If you have made it this far, congratulations. You have unlocked the truth. I want to ask you a question. With Poland and Romania now directly engaging Russian forces in the skies over Ukraine, effectively bringing NATO-aligned aircraft into direct combat, do you believe this unprecedented escalation will lead to a full-scale war between Russia and the entire NATO alliance? Or will it remain a contained, albeit intense, regional conflict? Join the debate and share your analysis in the comment. Like the video and most importantly, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.